Hey folks, Sean here coming at you with a quick Minutia Minute. Want to do something a little bit different today. You may have noticed yesterday there was no Wednesdtopia. Truth be told, I have not read my Wednesday books yet. I did pick them up, but I haven't actually read them. And the reason for that is because I picked something else up in addition to my regular Wednesday books. And that was this mammoth graphic novel put out from Image, I think actually last week. I don't think it came out this week. It came out last week. Which is, and it's funny because there's a little jacket sleeve thing that came on the outside of this, and it said that it was the basis for Darren Aaronofsky's film, which is coming out tomorrow. It's not. It is actually based on the original screenplay that Darren Aronofsky co-wrote with Ari Handel. So it's not actually a movie adaptation, and the movie isn't actually adapted from this. This is an early version of the script. So it's going to be really interesting to actually go see the movie tomorrow and see kind of what's different. And I think actually, while a lot of the sort of character beats and lines I feel like are going to be similar, I think the movie is actually going to be pretty severely cut back from what this comic book has inside of it, which is one of the reasons I wanted to pick it up. This is, I think, 256 pages of awesome, and I got a huge kick out of reading this, and I got to share with you some of my thoughts on it. Noah kind of holds a special place in my heart. As a literature and language major, I spent a lot of time with a lot of medieval texts, a lot of older texts as well. And of course, all of that writing usually comes in some form from the Bible. And my personal subject that I kept coming back to when I was in these classes was researching Noah, because Noah has a really, really rich history. It's a story that's very, very simple. The characters are there's not much to them. Like, you really don't know all that much about Noah. You get the flood story. You get that he had 3 sons, and that he had some burnt offerings for God that made God promise he wouldn't do this flood thing again. And then he was naked once around his kids. Like, that's all you get around Noah. Like, really very little is known about Noah based on the biblical text. However, you get outside the biblical text, and there is a really, really rich history around Noah's children, Noah's children's wives, Noah's wife, and just all the surrounding characters. A huge, really, really lush history. Medieval plays, like, for example, like there's the Wakefield set of plays, there's the York plays, that were put on basically every year as part of sort of like carnival, where they would basically tell the Bible in a series of plays for like 5 days or something like that, and it would just be constant plays and different versions of these stories told over and over again. And because these characters are so unfleshed out in the Bible, yet it's such a sort of rich story and rich concept, Noah's had kind of the star treatment in a lot of these stories and a lot of these interpretations. And so I spent a lot of my time reading different versions of Noah. Tomorrow we get a brand new version of Noah from Darren Aronofsky, which is going to be really, really interesting. And we already have another version of it in this comic book. So it's very, very interesting to me how these things come about and how these things change over time. And reading this was an absolute blast, because the thing that's great about Darren Aronofsky is he's a professed atheist, but he does his research. This is a comic book, or a movie and also a comic book that is already kind of being accused for taking a lot of sort of creative liberties with the story, which is something I never really have a problem with. I think that, you know, Bible stories are kind of there to be interpreted. If you don't interpret it, you're not really doing anything with it. And there's no reason, because there's plenty of versions of the story already if you're not going to do something original. But more to the point, he's not really taking that much artistic liberty. He is mining the Bible for everything that it has, and then he's going to a lot of other sources that have existed for centuries, and elaborating on those. So it was a really, really interesting read, and I kind of just want to share with you my thoughts. We're going to kick things off with the artwork, because holy cow, I mean, you look at the cover art alone, and it's really, really breathtaking. It looks like a strange sort of sci-fi epic kind of like almost 80s in terms of its inspiration, in terms of how it looks. Sort of like early 80s sort of sci-fi like concept art, it almost looks like to me. And that is what the book looks like for 256 pages. Just gorgeous artwork. The artist on this is Niko Henrichon. Not sure if I'm saying his name right. And I want to share with you just some key elements before I kind of dig into the story, just to kind of give you an idea of just how lush this book is. We have some flashbacks to sort of God smiting humans. You get what in the comic book is Bab Elim or something like that. This is the city that Noah kind of visits, where we kind of get a sense of sort of how evil everyone is. Really, really cool design here for this city. I'm presuming, I'm not familiar with what Bab Elim is. I don't know that name, but I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be pre-flood Babylon. I just have never heard it referred to as Babylon before, but I'm guessing that's what it is. I'm like 65% sure. So don't quote me on that, but I think I'm right. We get the inclusion of the Nephilim. The Nephilim are I'm terrible with names. Are giants that roam the earth. They are the offspring of gods and human women. And they're like the ultimate warriors. It sounds like sci-fi craziness, and when you see how they are illustrated in here, it looks like an Edgar Rice Burroughs novel to me. This looks like John Carter of Mars, which is awesome. And while they aren't described as having 6 arms in the Bible, these are described in the Bible. Like, these are real things. But what an incredible representation. Just really, really cool stuff. I should probably give you a good look at the ark. Again, this is directly what it looks like. This is exactly how the Bible describes it as looking. We have some, of course, because it's a big Hollywood schlock fest, we have some incredible panoramas of some epic battles that will happen. Really, really sweeping book, and I definitely recommend picking this up, particularly in the format that I got it in. It's almost the size of like an Absolute Edition. It's a little bit smaller. Probably like an Absolute Edition would be about this much bigger. So really, really close to that size, but really, really relevant for the pages within. And overall, I mean, for 256 pages and this size of a book, it's only $29.99, which sounds like a lot, but when you think about what you're getting, it's actually a pretty darn good deal. So now that we've kind of taken a look at the arc, let's kind of take a look at the actual story. The first thing I want to talk about for things that are kind of different from the traditional ideas of Noah are things that are actually very relevant to the Noah story in the Bible, but they're never explicitly referenced during the Noah story, but they kind of are in the periphery. They're in, you know, they're in the passages of the Bible that came before or came after the Noah story. The first thing is the Nephilim, which I showed earlier. They basically come and they help build the ark. That's not something that necessarily happens in the book, but the Nephilim are described immediately preceding the actual Noah story, before we get Noah, his lineage, and then what happens with Noah when he turns 500, which is he has kids, and then he deals with a flood. Anyway, the other major character in this that is completely, seems like almost like a complete fabrication, is a man called Tabal Cain. Now, of course, he's a Cain, so therefore he's quite evil indeed. It sounds like Hollywood schlock. However, if you do pick this up and you're wondering about that, that is actually kind of a tradition. So basically what happens in the story is Noah goes, he starts having visions of the flood. He enlists the help of the Nephilim, and then they sort of establish his main adversary as the leader, the general of these armies, and sort of the general of the rabbles of people that are in Babylon, who is this Tabal Cain guy. Tabal Cain is mentioned in the Bible. He's basically just described as a metal worker, or like an ironsmith, or like a gun, or excuse me, a weaponsmith. And that's all it really says about him, other than the fact that he had a sister. Her name is Name. And And that's all we know about him from the Bible, is those two things. He's been mentioned by Roman scholars, and he's been called sort of like a chemist. He's been called sort of like the founder of modern weaponry. He has kind of this rich sort of symbolic history that is alluded to in texts outside of the Bible. The thing about him being in this and in the Bible is the wife, or excuse me, the sister, which is Name. And Name is, in Jewish tradition, the wife of Noah. And the thing about Noah's wife is there's a lot of different versions of Noah's wife. So, you've got the Name version, who is the sister of Tubal-Cain. You have several different interpretations in medieval plays of what Noah's wife was like. Most of them not very favorable. I have two kind of favorites, one of which is she was basically this shrew of a woman. They'd been married for hundreds of years, and she just could not tolerate him. She thought he was just an idiot, and she wouldn't get on the boat, and she basically put her kid's life in jeopardy because she was being such a shrew. My other favorite interpretation of Noah's wife is basically Noah's wife as a representation for Satan. She is basically like the snake in the Garden of Eden, only she's trying to get Noah to do evil and trying to get Noah to, commit sin and basically lose favor with God. This comic, that was probably the most disappointing part, is Noah's wife isn't much of a character. This really focuses on Noah's personal struggle with sort of appeasing God's command, but also having to deal with the fact that he's going to basically kill, or be, not necessarily kill, but there's a sense of responsibility in the fact that he's built this ark to save himself and will not build anything to save anyone else. And there are times in the story when he has to basically commit murder by refusing to let people on the boat, including people that he knows are innocent, but he's following kind of God's command. That's what this book really focuses on. It would have been nice to have a little bit more dimension to Noah's wife. So hopefully maybe in the movie we'll get that, but in the comic we don't get that so much. So anyway, Noah's enlisted his help. He's building the ark, and Tubal-Cain comes. He is determined to basically take the ark from Noah ultimately, and you get the big battle. That was the biggest sort of leap between prior tellings of the Noah story and this one, is you don't usually get that big grand battle. But at the same time, I could see, you remember we're talking about stories that, when you're getting a lot of Noah stories was really in medieval times, with morality plays and, that general era. And, you're not going to have this big elaborate army thing for what's basically kind of an amateurish play festival where they retell all these stories from the Bible. You're not going to get that. If they could have done it, I wouldn't have put it past them. So it's something that doesn't really bother me, and it was really fun seeing what in the Bible is described as sort of the greatest warriors to ever walk the earth actually fight, which was it was a riot. After we continue past that point, you get basically when they're in the ark, and they've had to face off against several people. We get to a point where there's only the tops of mountains, and you see people climbing up the mountains and sort of trying to find the last option of salvation, but they can't because ultimately they are going to drown. Really, really poignant moment, which is something that I hope they have very specifically in here. It's several, not several pages, but it's a few pages of the sort of struggle of these people on the mountaintop, and hopefully they spend a little bit of time on it in the movie as well, because that's actually a very specific reference to medieval poetry that talks about the flood. And the thing that's great about it is it's told from the perspective of the people who are dying. And it's a few pages. It's part of a much longer work where he's just recounting the Bible in stanza after stanza. But that particular chunk was really, really emotional because it's about these people that know they are going to die. And it's that moment of sort of having to come to grips with it, and the fear and the unwillingness to sort of accept their fate, but knowing that it's going to happen and having to slowly just kind of succumb to the water. It's like I said, it's like 3 or 4 pages worth of poetry just devoted to that one moment, which we get in this book, which was really, really interesting and really, really cool that they put that in there. As things kind of get towards the end, there's some really really interesting drama with his sons and his sons' potential wives. There's some pretty big deviations here where it's about sort of who gets to be on the boat and who doesn't, which is something that hasn't historically been tackled. But again, it really is there to service the story of Noah and the journey he's going on as someone who is part of this, you know, God-ordained sort of mass genocide. And it's really interesting, actually, how they kind of play that into it, and using his sons as a major sort of fixture point for that, for the telling of that sort of storyline. It is important to note that his kids are kids in this, whereas in the context of the Noah story, you know, Noah was 500 plus years old, and his sons were about 100 years old. So, you know, they had families at this point. And they had, or at the very least, they had wives at this point in the context of sort of biblical history. You really get the sense that this story was told as kind of an ecological message, which I think was an interesting way to take it. Darren Aaronofsky has called this the least biblical Bible story of all time, because he's using the Noah story as an opportunity to talk about the importance of sort of respecting Mother Nature, I guess, in so many words. And while it is a little bit heavy-handed in the beginning, I think they do a good job of kind of bringing things together by the end of the graphic novel. So all in all, this was a really, really interesting book. I've talked about it for I don't even know how long. Really, really interesting subject for me. I've read lots of Noah stories. I've read lots of flood stories. It's important to note that, you know, the flood story is not just a Bible story. There are lots and lots of other texts that deal with ancient biblical floods, very similar to Noah's. Some of them have Noah in them. Some of them don't have Noah in them, but they all kind of have the same kind of narrative, whether it's, you know, in the Epic of Gilgamesh and it's, you know, ancient Babylonian text, or it's ancient Hebrew text, or it's Islamic text. It's all sort of in there. And again, you know, very, very interesting focal point in history with the Noah story, how it fits in later on down the road, and how it comes back yet again in this sort of big Hollywood extravaganza. So anyway, really, really interesting read. If you are interested, I do really recommend picking it up. Again, it is only $30, which for a book this size and this quality, very, very high quality paper, it's definitely worth your time and worth the extra $30. So anyway, that's about all I have to say. I hope you don't mind me rambling on a bit about Noah today, because it was just really, really interesting for me, and I had to get this out. Hope you guys have a great Thurstopia, and I will see you guys soon with more comics, as always.